Hi, my name's TJ Douglas, and I'm the owner of the Urban Grape out in Chestnut Hill. Today we're going to talk about a few dessert wines and dessert styles of wine that I really enjoy. These are great wines that are typically going to be much sweeter than still wines, meaning wines that are not fortified or wines without bubbles. You have this category. In order to make wines a little bit sweeter, there are typically three ways you can do it. You can either dry the wines out on straw mats, which basically raisinates the wine. So when you press the wine, you're getting less water out. So what happens is that the sugar and the water ratio changes. More sugar, less water, so you get a sweeter style wine to ferment. Second style is something that a lot of people are familiar with, something called ice wine. And what that happens there is that the grapes on the vine are either naturally frozen, or what they do, people spray water on it during cooler nights, and that freezes the grapes. And what that does, it freezes the water on the inside of the grape, once again changing the ratio of sugar and water, so you get another sweet wine. And then one of the last ways to make dessert wine and make sweeter style wines is something called Botrytis Cinerea, which is a little geeky, but the nickname to that is called noble rot. And this is coming from places that are a little bit more humid, down by rivers. And what happens, you get a natural fungus called Botrytis cinerea on the grape skins, which actually put a little tiny microscopic pinholes in the grape. And what that does, it lets the liquid out, the water out, and dehydrates it. So once again, change in the ratio of sugar and water. So we're going to talk about a few of those styles today. The first wine right here is Chardonnay, and this is coming from Australia. And this is made in that first Botrytis cinerea, the noble rot way, where this is coming from a very humid climate. The Chardonnay grapes start off very, very large, and then what happens once this fungus gets on there, it puts little pinholes, the grape slowly shrinks. And then once the sugar levels are really, really high and it lost probably about 50% of its mass and its water weight, they take it off and they start the winemaking process and they press. A lot of dessert wines are going to be much more expensive than your non-dessert wines like your still or your sparkling wines, just because you get so much less yield from it, because in all of these processes you are lowering the mass and the weight of the actual grape. And what's going to happen with a lot of these styles of dessert wines is that they're great with a wide variety of desserts, whether they're going to be pastries or dried fruits or nuts. But some of these, like the next one, which I'm going to talk about, actually can be considered a dessert wine, but it's mostly used as an aperitif or with appetizers, more specifically with foie gras. So this is one of the, if not the best dessert wine or best bottle of wine in the world. This is Château, and this comes from an area called Sauternes in southern Bordeaux. And just like the Australian Chardonnay, this also is a result of Botrytis cinerea, the noble rot, and this is really what made noble rot famous. With this, when you walk into the Château vineyards, they have an archway, and it has something on there, and it translates into one bottle per vine. So for Château, one of these bottles, these half bottles, comes off of a vine. So it's not a lot of liquid, and this kind of warrants the many hundreds of dollars for a half bottle. And this is something that I bought for my son a couple years after he was born, that he can drink at his wedding. Dessert wines are some of the longest lived wines in the world. Some of these Châteaux go back to the 1800s, which is really cool. So first we're covering Australia, then we're going to France, and now we're going to another famous dessert area in Hungary, and this is a wine called Tokaj. Now, Tokaj is predominantly a grape called fir mint. And this right here, the ASZU, asu, what that means, it means dried. And so what they do with this is that this also suffers from Botrytis cinerea. So we have a little theme going on here. This right here is much more sweet. This is going to be great with really rich foods. If you want to go heavier cheeses with it, you can go oily cheeses with it. This is great chilled, consumed all by itself, has a little nut characteristic to it. So now we're going to my second favorite wine in the world right here. We're going to one of my favorite producers, La Spinetta. And this right here is changing the way that the dessert wine is being made. This is the Passito method, and the Passito method is very popular in Italy. So this right here is one of the coolest wines on the table. because with this you get kind of like a burned orange, you get almost like a little bit of a cayenne pepper. So this is a very spicy dessert wine, and you can tell by the color they use a good amount of wood on this. This is much darker, and what's nice about this is that once you open it up, it can actually stay very pleasant for about a month and a half or so, which is very long-lived once you pop the bottle. Then we're moving to Canada. And this is one of the most famous Canadian styles of wine, and this is an ice wine. And so with ice wine, just like I mentioned before, what they do, they freeze the grapes. Now in Enniskillen, they do everything naturally there, so they don't ever spray water in their vineyards at all. It's so cold in Canada. And they just, the natural fog in the morning will then freeze. And what that does, it puts a nice little coating around the outside of the grape, and the water freezes, and then they press, and you get mostly sugar out of there. So this is a grape that they actually grow on the East Coast here too. It's called Vidal. And what's nice about this is that this is really, really, really bright in acid. A lot of peach, once again, apricot flavors. Kind of seeing another common thread here with styles of and flavors of these dessert wines. This is very long-lived, and this is great if you're going to do any kind of like fruit cake with it, because this goes very, very well with dried fruits. Last but not least, we're going to go to Alsace, and Alsace is on the eastern border, right on the Vosges Mountains in France. And this is a really cool grape that a lot of people drink during Thanksgiving. It's a grape called Gewürztraminer. Now, with Gewürztraminer, this is something called Vendange tardive in France, and that basically means late harvest. And late harvest means that, let's say you're picking your grapes typically in middle of September, middle of October. This is something that you would leave on the vines until the winemaker and the vineyard manager seems fit. So it would typically be a few more weeks or so, and what that does, the longer the grape is going to be on the vine, it's also getting more flavors in there, but it's going to be less water and more sugar. So once again, less water, more sugar. And this is something that I think is really best by itself here. It's so rich. It's kind of climbing onto being cloying on the side of the mouth, but once again, backed by that acid, it makes it very, very pleasant to drink. Gewürztraminer in German stands for spicy, so Gewürz means spicy. ER in German is from, and it's from Tramen, so Gewürztraminer, so spicy wine of Tramen. And it's really cool. So these are just great dessert wines that are typically consumed more during the fall, winter months, but you can really enjoy them all year round.